Are we rolling? Good, because you have no idea how hard it is to sync up two Blu-ray players so they're exactly running at the same time. So we got to hurry up. This demo footage is going to end any second now. But you know what? It's worth it for you, dear viewer, because today we are comparing the Sony A9G against the Sony A8G. They're already out of sync again. Doesn't matter. So here's the thing. Sony A9G, for the 55-inch or 65-inch, you're going to spend somewhere between $1,000 to $1,300 more than the equivalent Sony A8G, and that's a lot of money. You know, with the Sony A9G, I suppose you could go up to 77 inches, but we're not really talking about that because if you can afford to buy that, then you don't really care about the difference between these two TVs. Now, on paper, the differences look to be pretty subtle. There's some specs differences, but sometimes when you add all those small things together, it turns into one bigger thing. So is that the case here? Well, I'm going to tell you, but not yet. Stick with me. So let's start out with some of the more obvious stuff you can see right when you walk up to the TV. First of all, it would be the stand. So this stand leaves almost no gap between the bottom of the TV and whatever platform you're putting it on. Also, the footprint for the stand itself is very small and unobtrusive. You can't really see it when you sit down, so when you do sit down, you just kind of see a TV floating there on the stand. Now, if you're not going to stand mount, you can always wall mount the TV, and Sony makes a special wall mount hardware that gets it very flush up against the wall. Also, the bump out on the back of this TV is not quite as big as it is on the A8G, although I think you're really splitting hairs there. Either one of them are going to look fantastic when you wall mount them. Also, the bezel on this TV is almost non-existent. There's like a little slim band of metal, and that's all. But when you take a close look at the TV, you can see that the panel itself doesn't actually start displaying until well inside the top, bottom, and side edges. So the notion that it has almost no bezel is kind of wasted on that because you still see a border around the image. That's true for both televisions, honestly, so let's not weigh that too heavily in our consideration. Now as we switch to the Sony A8G, as I mentioned before, the bezel also very, very small. There's also this little border that goes all the way around, so who cares? I mean, essentially, they look the same from a panel perspective. Slightly larger bump out on the back, but again, not enough to really impact a wall mount situation. Really, the biggest difference here is the stand, which you can see elevates the TV a little bit in the way that the A9G does not. It's also a reversible stand, which we covered a little bit in our A8G videos. You can either have the legs protruding out like this, and then Sony provides little foam blocks that you can put on the bottom of a sound bar so that you can cross right over those legs with no problem. It will need to be a very trim sound bar, however, so you don't block any of the screen. Wouldn't you know it, Sony makes one of those. At any rate, you could also flip this around and have the curved section coming out front, which is just a different look, so whichever one you like better. Now let's talk about the inputs on the TV. The Sony A9G does have one EARC port. That doesn't mean it has HDMI 2.1 because it doesn't. It doesn't do variable refresh rate or auto low latency mode or any of that other stuff, but it will support EARC through one port. Unfortunately, the Sony A8G doesn't offer that at all. One more thing before we dive deep into the inside of the television, on the surface level, and that's a really bad pun, is the acoustic surface technology. So both TVs sport two actuators, one toward the left and one toward the right. Both TVs have two subwoofers, which are really just, you know, small drivers that are handling the low frequencies so that the sound comes from the television. And we've talked about that in both reviews. It's a pretty impressive effect. But the difference between the two really comes down to a matter of power. It's about 10 watts per channel across the board with the A8G. With this Sony 9G, it's 20 watts across the board except for one channel which only gets 10 watts. I don't get that. At least that's what it says on the spec sheet. From a practical perspective, however, there's not a huge sound quality difference between the televisions. The distortion level on the Sony A8G is a little bit higher because it's less powered. So you get a little bit more punch out of the Sony A9G, but honestly, between the two televisions, the effect is so cool, I'm going to call it more or less even. And honestly, you should probably put a soundbar at least, or maybe a full surround sound system around either one of these televisions. Oh, and I almost forgot, the Sony A9G can be used as your center channel speaker. So check it out. There's little speaker wire terminals on the back of the television. So you just run your speaker wire from your AV receiver into the TV and voila, you don't have to have a center channel speaker anymore. The TV will take care of that. As I mentioned before, you still get acoustic surface technology, 2 actuators, 2 woofers. Not as much power, but still sounds great. Better than most TVs that you buy these days. The main thing is you don't get the speaker wire inputs on the back, so this is not going to function as your center channel. If you're going to run a surround sound system, definitely plan on having a center speaker involved somewhere. Now let's dig into the nitty-gritty stuff, the picture quality related stuff. First of all, when you get the box home, you're going to see stuff like Master Series and Netflix Calibrated Mode and IMAX Enhanced. These are all things that are meant to imply a sense of premium quality. So Master Series means that Sony basically built this to be their best possible TV, as close to what you would get in Hollywood if you're using it as a mastering monitor, right? Netflix Calibrated Mode just basically means that Netflix approves of this TV for displaying its content in the way it wants it seen. And IMAX Enhanced is more of the same thing, right? You're supposed to have peace of mind that when you watch that content on this TV, it looks the way it should. And yeah, it does. It's a fantastic OLED TV. So let's just swipe that all out of the way. Then another big difference with the A9G, you do get Dolby Vision Night and Dolby Vision Day picture modes, right? So if we start a Dolby Vision title, we'll have the option to pick those picture modes. And again, that's Dolby processing coming into play, where we have a very specific calibration for that particular kind of content, and it's supposed to make it look its best. And I do have to say, I dig Dolby Vision Day and Night mode. I pick them every time I'm watching something in Dolby Vision, which these days is more and more often. In terms of picture modes, mostly the same. What you don't get with the A8G is Dolby Vision Night and Dolby Vision Day mode. Everything else is still there, but those Dolby Vision specific modes aren't available to you. Also, it's not a Netflix calibrated TV, but it does have IMAX Enhanced, so that should kind of tell you something. I mean, they just didn't pursue the certification from Netflix for this particular television, and hence it probably costs a little bit less because of that. Now we talk about picture processing, which is not sexy, but kind of meaningful. So the Sony A9G has Sony's very best picture processor. It's called the X1 Ultimate, not to be confused with the X1 Extreme that you get in the A8G, which, by the way, Extreme sounds pretty awesome to me, but the Ultimate chip does offer some key processing bits that you don't get in the other television. Now look, there's no way I can get all of Sony's marketing speak in here correctly. I mean, I think there's object-based HDR remaster, object-based super resolution pixel contrast booster, Pro Extreme Ultimate Hardcore HD X. I don't know. Look, the bottom line is this. The processing is far more advanced in some key ways. That object-based part is important. So like some of the TVs that we've seen from other manufacturers, the Sony is reaching back to a database of recognizable images and using that to improve the overall picture quality on a scene-by-scene, frame-by-frame, pixel-by-pixel basis, which, I mean, this is some really hardcore computing stuff, but you can see a difference, just a little bit. You have to dive in deep to see any particular difference between one pixel and another on each of these TVs, but when you stand back and you look at both of them at the same time, you definitely get a different sense of depth out of the A9G than you do the A8G. And believe me, you gotta be some kind of nutty videophile like myself in order to really pick up on it. But if you're that hardcore and you want the very, very best, that's where the A9G's at. In terms of picture processing, the A8G is no slouch. I mean, it has the X1 Extreme chip, which is far and away better than the chips that we had just a couple of years ago. The upscaling is top notch. In fact, we tested it with our crappy 720p cable signal, and it did as great a job as you should ever expect from a TV at taking that weak, low bit rate, low resolution stuff and making it look decent at 65 inches. What's more, when we stream stuff on this TV, whether it's from YouTube or Netflix, I mean, even though you can get high-resolution HDR content from those guys, it's still compressed, and compression artifacts are real, especially in big blue areas like this. You see a lot of banding and a lot of artifacts going on. Now, it can't get rid of them entirely, and in fact, our camera exposes them more than your eyes do, but it does a really fantastic job of evening that stuff out. The Sony A8G weighs in about the same as the A9G in terms of out-of-box color. In fact, maybe a little bit better, but once you calibrate them, they both rise to the same level. So in terms of just pure color output, color gamut, They're about leveled there. You can get a little bit more pop out of the A9G thanks to its better processing, but at its core, still the same panel and the same capabilities. We talked a little bit about how the A8G doesn't have some of the higher end picture processing as the A9G, and really we'll take a look at that in just a second with a side-by-side comparison. So let's talk about the last little bits that are different from the TV. The A9G has a much nicer remote than the A8G. I mean, functionally speaking, they're both fine, but this feels nicer and looks nicer. Also, inside the A8G is not the super fancy chip that runs Android TV like it does on the A9G. A9G, lightning fast with Android TV. I got no problems with it. A8G, a little bit sluggish, a little bit laggy, although I will say it's way better than prior years Sony's running Android TV. So if you want the most zippy experience, the A9G's got it for you. The A8G, just a little bit laggy, so if that kind of thing bugs you, keep it in mind. But again, not a huge deal breaker, not for me anyway. All right, picture quality comparison time. Now I can tell you right now that the TVs behind me look a whole lot better to me than they do to you right now. But I did dig in deep. I was looking at really granular stuff, really fine detail, trying to see the difference between the TVs and what the processing differences might have been. And then I realized I'm spending all my time on the wrong thing. Here's the bottom line. When you're talking about at least $1,000 difference between these two TVs, maybe up to $1,300, there's just not enough difference between the A9 and the A8G to justify that price difference. Not for most people. Look, if you're an enthusiast with a load of money and you just don't care, you want to buy the best and get all the bragging rights that come with it, A9G, absolutely, have a party. I don't care. It's a great television, and I still maintain it's the best TV made in 2019. But for the vast majority of you who are out there, especially if you're spending time saving up for this TV, and it's a meaningful purchase for you, and you just want to get the best that your money can buy, the A8G is where it's at. It makes the most sense, by far. And, you know, it took a long time for me to arrive at that, believe it or not. But at the end of the day, A8G just makes more sense.